All right, everyone. Today on the podcast, we have a very special guest, Dr. Annie Neurohr. She is the doctor of physical therapy at Sinai Running Rehabilitation Program here in Baltimore. She basically saved my running career like 2 years ago, which I'll always be grateful for and thank you for.
Yeah, you were in a dark place then.
I think I had a high hamstring tendonitis that I feel like you've probably had other people who have had that.
Yeah.
It's one of the worst things.
It's very frustrating.
Like,
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's some listeners even on this show now who have or are struggling with it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that's just torturous because it doesn't even affect your running really. It's more when you're sitting down and always constant pain, like on car rides and plane rides and things like that.
Yep.
And you got me back to where I should be. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was actually easier than I thought it was going to be.
Oh,
I don't know why that was, but
yeah.
You bounced back like better than
That dry needling, I gotta say, I can't tell you how many people I've turned on to the dry needling who have come to me who have been like, yeah, I have this high hamstring thing. I'm like, just do the dry needling.
I know what you need.
Yeah, it really does work wonders.
Yeah.
Anyways.
And the strengthening, you're supposed to say that too.
Yeah, but I mean, even better if you could just do
if you don't have to do work and you
Yeah,
just let
if you
someone
just stick
stab
needles
you,
in, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
That's
All
all
is way better.
I'd rather get stabbed to death than actually have to do.
Take time out of my day. Yeah, absolutely not.
Anyways, thanks for coming on the show. We're excited to talk about a lot of stuff. Meg, we got a lot of listener questions.
Yeah, but okay, before we dive into all these, can you talk to us about like your background, how you got into this, and maybe like what differentiates a physical therapist from some other like genres?
Yeah, of course. So I've been an avid runner for a really long time. I started distance running when I was 9 years old, actually.
Whoa.
So I've been a runner for a really long time.
Wait, what do you mean you started distance running when you were 9?
Yeah, it's it's a crazy story. I grew up playing sports, and then it's a weird, but I started running one day. Like my mom is very active, and we were doing like presidential fitness stuff at school where you run the mile. And so
I hated that.
Yep. Never passed the sit and reach test actually, but the mile I was pretty good at, and I got into it kind of from that, and then I was a pretty restless kid, so I would run around a lot, and we were driving home from school one day, and I just asked my mom to drop me off at the end of the neighborhood, and it's like a mile to my house, and I was still in my like private school khakis and polo, and like loafers or whatever you wear as a kid in private school, and I just ran home. And the next day I was like, I kind of want to do that again. So I did it again. And then eventually I started running like from my car to the house and then to my neighbor's mailbox and then coming back. And then eventually I was getting up to doing like 6 miles a day.
And this is age 9.
Yeah.
And just for fun?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because
I love it.
I started when I was 9, and then I think I got really into like consistently doing like 6 miles. It became almost kind of, I think, neurotic. It was kind of a way, my family was having some issues at the time, and it was like very much a way of like, my parents even talked to like a child psychologist about it because it was like so obsessive in a sense.
Whoa.
And what he or she told them was like, when kids are that young, like they don't always like know how to communicate control or lack of control, and so you'll see kids either like start certain activities or things like that, and they become almost kind of obsessive, and that's actually like what had happened with me.
Whoa.
So it's kind of a weird way to get into it, but it was very,
I mean, that's probably the way that most adults get into it too.
Yeah,
exactly.
for sure.
Yeah. It's like a huge way to kind of, I think, if you don't know how to verbalize anxiety or restlessness or things like that, lack of control, I think running can be a big help for that. And that's kind of what's cultivated my desire to get as many people running as possible, not even really more so for the physical benefits, even though I'm a physical therapist. I think I see so many other pros to running, and I get really excited when people want to get into it because I think that there's just so many things that it brings to your life, whether that be community or, burning off some energy or allowing your place like a space to think. So
Plus, the more runners you get into it, the more clients you have down the
oh,
road.
oh exactly.
More
It's just
injuries.
creating my own market. I will always have a job.
Seriously.
But yeah, long story short, that's how I got into running. And then
So did anything come of running? Like, did you join the track team or what happened after?
yeah,
after
so
that?
I ran track at my school, and then I actually transferred to our larger public school because I was like really good on the track and cross country teams at my private school, but we had like 5 people on our team, so it was kind of a big fish, small pond thing. And I was really into soccer as well, so I actually transferred to public school to run for their cross country program and play for their soccer team.
And you still play soccer because
I
you
do.
you come to the field after my kids
I do.
kids have practice.
I do. I still play in season like 3 days a week usually.
Yeah.
So I still play a lot. But but yeah, I didn't run competitively in college or anything like that, and I didn't play soccer competitively. But that was what kind of got me into physical therapy. Is I was like I want people to be active. I want, whether it be soccer, whether it be running, whether it be just being able to move better. I'm pretty passionate about that, and that's kind of what led me to become a PT in the first place.
So what does schooling entail to become PT?
It's a lot of schooling. It's a lot more than people think. It's a doctorate level of education now. So that means you do 4 years of undergrad work. Most people get their undergraduate degree in something like exercise science or physiology, things like that. So my degree is in exercise science with a minor in psychology. And then you go to a 3-year-long graduate program to get your doctorate. So it's about 7 years of total school.
Wow. And how long have you been doing this?
I've been a PT for 8 years now. Yeah.
Nice. And how long have you been at this Sinai Rehabilitation Center for Runners? I probably got that name wrong, but
We have like 7.
just for runners who want to do good and do better. How long have you been there for?
I've been there for it'll be 8 years in
okay.
June. So I've been there for the majority of my career.
And then can you tell us more about that? Because it's a lot of PTs work for, like a certain physical therapy practice they might be the running person there or something, or maybe do a wide range of things, but you're like specifically for runners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I feel like is that unusual to be specifically just for runners?
It is. It is. I think what makes us unique. So I took the job at Sinai. I had actually turned down the job initially and then worked at another location in Annapolis, and it wasn't really quite a good fit. So I went back to Sinai and re-interviewed, which was a humbling experience.
And I would like more money if there's some available.
And what we have at Sinai is a 3D gait lab, which they weren't using for running mechanics at the time. They were using it for studying things like really complex orthopedics problems or kids with cerebral palsy, things like that. It was more of like a motor development type approach. But I saw it and I thought, this is a really unique lab and we could do really in-depth running analysis if we had the population for it. So I actually brought the program to my now boss, and he actually folded it in half at my interview and told me that it was not what we do here because we did not treat runners really that frequently before that. We see a lot of total joint replacements, a lot of complex orthopedic surgeries, things like that. But I figured with the lab, we could definitely do it. And so it was a very kind of slow build, but having that type of technology really allows you to bring in a lot of people. It's really unique. It's a lot different than I think traditional physical therapy is, at least with the assessment approach. And so, that's what we have, a really comprehensive running assessment. It's about 2 hours long. We put sensors on your legs. We film you from 14 different 3D cameras. We look at, I think in the past, if you expect like a running assessment, someone films you with an iPad. And we still do that, but we film you with 14 other 3D cameras. And we can look at things like ground reaction forces, peak accelerations, turnover time, cadence, all of these kind of metrics that you can't really see.
Wow. I feel like at that point you could just kind of sell that CGI to the next Marvel movie or something. It's like
It's the same system.
Really?
Like, yeah, the system we use it does like a bunch of animation and things like that.
that's cool.
So yeah, not outside the realm of possibility.
They should put like skins on each person that's like, this is your superhero for this trainee PT session.
That should be part of the assessment is what superhero you are at the end.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of cool.
Take
Good
that.
marketing
Yeah.
tool.
Just give me a percentage of that.
Yeah, I'll
Whatever.
put that in my back pocket.
Who's coming in to do these assessments? Are these like, do people come in when they're injured? Is this injury prevention? Is this like, I'm trying to get faster? Like, who's doing this?
Really, all of those.
Okay.
So Maryland is unique in that we're a direct access state for physical therapy. So for the most part, you don't need a physician's referral to come get physical therapy. Now, some insurance companies still require it. Okay. So the majority of what we see is people who are rehabbing from an injury, and that's I would say what makes up the bulk of our population. But for a lot of people, they can come in having no injury at all. They're just entering a training cycle, and they honestly want kind of a...
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if you're coming in, you're training for your first marathon, and you're like, I just want to know what kind of accessory work that would most benefit me, then we'll take a look at your running form, and we'll give you kind of like additional exercises. So you're not like wasting your time doing a bunch of Instagram rehab exercises that they told you to do for knee pain. You're like doing things that are particularly specific for your running form.
You're saying that stuff on Instagram is not, it's not right.
It's not always wrong. It's just not specific, I guess.
Yeah. So you can come. So insurance companies will cover like a preventative type thing.
They can. It depends on your insurance company.
Okay.
And I always tell people like covered doesn't mean free. It means that they would cover you as they would a physical therapy evaluation. So some people that is free, like your copay is $0 and they cover 100%. Some people that's your copay is still $75 and they're only going to cover 80%. So it doesn't always mean free.
Okay.
But for the most part, you will not have to pay the self-pay rate unless you're coming self-pay, and I would not recommend that.
Yeah. That's never the best scenario.
Yeah, so it's a very pricey cost at that point.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm impressed that there's runners going in for preventative reasons.
Yeah.
I know,
Like, I just
right?
assumed everyone gets injured. Then I got to see a
now
PT.
I gotta go do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we see all different experience levels. We've had scenarios where I've put someone on the treadmill for the assessment, and I realize like this person has never run on a treadmill, and so we have to actually go outside. There's a trail around Sinai, and we have them run outside. So we sometimes have to change it up a little bit. But we've seen everyone from like very new runners, people just trying to get into it, to some of the top Baltimore marathoners in the state. So
yeah,
we had a guy come from Germany once. That was pretty cool.
Really?
So yeah, we have people kind of from all over.
I mean, I feel like pretty much all our friends, I'm just like, go there. If your
I appreciate
insurance
that.
covers it, yeah.
The amount of times I've had someone be like, "Oh yeah, well Robbie sent me." I'm like, oh, thanks, Robbie.
Yes, nice. That's cool. And then you're still running a lot too. So what's kind of like your favorite distance right now, or if you're training for anything?
I'm not sure. My goal last year was to do the B3, just to run those like 3 races in Baltimore because I hadn't done any of them yet, and to do Celtic Solstice because I had like always wanted to do it, and every year I'm out of town. So this was the first year we got to do it.
What did you think of it? Those some fun hills.
Yeah, it was. It was better than I thought it was gonna be. In terms of the hills, I think I was like thinking of Dreaded Druid Hills, kind of. So it was better than I thought it was gonna be. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed just kind of the weirdness that is like the things that surround it, like the Irish setters and like the mulled wine and like the bagpipes and stuff. I was like, what is happening?
It's a weird race for sure.
It's weird, but I'm into that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I'm glad that you're the same shoe size as me because I can give you the performance shoes that I like.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. This is a...
Sometimes if I'll have like race, because if there's people that I give away shoes, like family, like shoes that I don't use anymore, they're not running like races, a lot of the people. So it's nice to be like, here's...
What did you race in?
For that day, I have the last batch that Robbie gave to me had about 3 pairs of the New Balance.
There is
That's the Elite
racers.
V3.
Yeah.
that's the Elite V3. Yeah,
I have
so
9
that's-
pairs as well.
we got like
I have-
triples of them. Yeah.
My husband was so pissed because I had just gone to Falls Road and gotten a new pair.
Oh,
It was
really?
Like you and I, like we hadn't talked in a while, and I was like, I'm gonna go treat myself and spent over $200.
Oh, yeah.
And then like the next week, you texted me, you're like, I got some shoes. I was like, well, you got any New Balance? And you're like, I've got like 7 pairs of New Balances, and
Yeah.
I was like, why did you spend that money?
Yeah, I mean, just anytime you need a shoe, just at least
I
hit me
should.
up. I
I
don't
will.
seriously. You're helping me out.
Okay.
Anyways, okay, so that's. Do you want to get into some questions
Yeah.
or maybe some like more? Since a lot of people probably want to hear some PT advice on, and there's so many things I feel like that runners deal with, like the injury and variations of them seem endless. So
And there's always like 12 different names for kind of the same thing.
right. So we might have to do maybe have you back in another 6 months or something and do like another follow
Yeah,
up.
I mean, I posted
always
on
up for that.
on Instagram, like if anyone has any questions for PT, and we got like 100 submissions, and I was like, what is happening? Like
Yeah.
everyone's injured, everyone's the guy has a hamstring problem.
we
Yeah.
actually hit the page limit on Google Docs for. I'm just kidding. But anyways, what do you? Okay, so let's see, Meg. What do you think we should talk about
Well,
first?
so Annie kind of put some key themes here. Should we maybe run
Yeah, we
through
can run through
those? And then if we want to answer some of the specific questions. Okay, so let's start with best warm up, cool downs for runners. Do we need to do anything or can we just start running? Because a lot of times that's what I do.
To be honest, so do I. So I understand like everyone has only so much time in a day, and ideally, yes, if you can spend 5 to 10 minutes warming up, and it doesn't have to be this very specific thing. This is kind of general for anyone who's not injured. They're just kind of like trying to warm up their body. Usually you want to target main muscle groups of hamstrings, hip flexors. Your ankles are a big thing that go kind of unnoticed, like working on just quick ankle mobilization.
They go noticed for me, but yeah.
Ankle stiffness is a big contributor to things like Achilles issues and things like knee pain. So
That is interesting because you never hear anyone talk
Right.
about warming up your ankles.
yeah, it's big. It's actually big in like the CrossFit community to do ankle self mobilizations, but you don't
Like
see
ankle rolls? Like what are we talking about?
Like a lot of times what you'll do is you're almost in this like lunging position and you're trying to work on driving your knee over your toe to loosen up your actual ankle joint.
Okay.
Because you need a certain amount of what they call tibial progression, meaning your knee can go and progress over your toe to have like proper running form. Otherwise, you end up actually overloading the front of your knee and you get things like patellofemoral pain or runner's knee, or you get something further down like Achilles issues. And a lot of that comes into play because of reduced ankle mobility.
Okay.
I always thought it was your glutes. Everyone said if your glutes aren't loose or whatever strong, then your knees have problems.
And it's not wrong. It's just I tend to think that we like blame or praise the glutes over
It seems
everything
like
else.
a lot.
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
so
and they are
that's-
important, but it's I think there are some big studies that come out about like glute roll and like ACL injuries, and then also in running injuries, and then it kind of like took this snowball where like every PT was talking about glutes, and then every runner was talking about glutes, and the glutes are really important, but it's not the only thing to think about.
Okay, I have a really random question that's
Yeah.
not totally related. But okay, so you've been doing this for 8 years. Have things changed? Like, were you recommending something different 8 years ago than you are now?
That's a good question. I have to think about that.
Yeah, because I always think about even nutrition wise.
Right.
It's like remember
It's totally different.
Like I was reading, Element is one of our. I don't know if they're sponsoring this, but they sponsored the
Yeah.
drop, and it was talking about how sodium was always like, no, do
Right.
not take any sodium. It's terrible for you. Now it's like now we don't have enough sodium.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for the most part, things are pretty consistent. And they should be. Like, the body is a machine. Like, we should, at this point, kind of understand how it works.
Yeah.
It might get boring to recommend the same things over and over again. Foam rolling was huge
Right.
several years ago.
That's
and I think-
actually that was on the list.
Yeah,
so like,
that's-
what
yeah.
about foam rolling?
Yeah, foam rolling, like initially people thought when you were foam rolling, you were like breaking up
In my mind, that's what's happening.
Yeah, that's how it feels.
Yeah.
It's not really breaking up any like adhesions or any dense connective tissues or scar tissue or anything like that. The role of foam rolling is really to increase blood flow. You're basically doing something that warms up your muscles or kind of, in a sense, just provides a stimulus for your muscles. Now, there are other ways you can kind of crack your back out of foam roller. You can use it for mobility, things like that. But the idea of actually rolling out your muscles, I think initially people were like, oh, yeah, it's like a way to break down scar tissue or break down adhesions. And it's not really actually doing that. It still can be really helpful because blood flow is always helpful, particularly to areas that don't get it very well. But yeah, it was definitely much bigger when I came out of physical therapy. So like everybody was recommending foam rolling.
And with foam rolling, is it better before or after? Because I feel like there's recommendations for both.
Yeah, there is. That's a good question. I don't really have a good answer. Okay. I tell people if you can do it for 2 minutes before and 2 minutes after, that's probably ideal. Because the point of it is to increase blood flow, which you want to happen before a run. But another added benefit is to reduce muscle tone overall, not by breaking muscles down, but just reducing the tone. So the actual like tension held in your muscles after a workout can be reduced through foam rolling. So there's kind of a benefit to both. So if you have the time to do both, or you have to think about like what's more important for you, reducing tone after your runs or warming up your muscles. There are probably better ways to warm up your muscles though than foam rolling before.
Okay. So what would be something like that? Or is there, do you do stretches or do you more like, what do you call it? Active or why am I forgetting?
Dynamic.
Dynamic. Yeah.
So dynamics are the best.
Yeah.
Dynamics are the best way to warm up, not things like holding a stretch for a whole minute. Those aren't usually helpful for pre-run things. A lot of runners I work with, they have like a set type of drills that they do. So they're always dynamic and then they're always meant to kind of prime what's called your sagittal plane motion. So the most efficient runners are very efficient in the sagittal plane. And the sagittal plane is like if you were to watch someone run past you. And that's things like how much your knee bends, how much your hip extends, how much your hip drives, things like that. And then if you think about reduction in transverse and frontal plane. So transverse is the plane is as if you were watching someone from above kind of running underneath you. And those are things like rotations, like how much your arms rotate when you run, how much your hips rotate, how much you pronate, things like that. And then the frontal plane would be someone running towards you. And that's when we talk about things like if someone's hip is dropping, if someone's knee is diving in. So if you can reduce the types of transverse and frontal plane movements and maximize the sagittal plane ones, you're typically the most efficient. Okay. And so a lot of warm-ups are used or drills are used to kind of prime those types of movements while also warming up your muscles and tendons themselves.
And then would that be like leg swings, things like that?
Usually it's things like high knees, butt kickers. Ben Adams, who you guys know who I work with, he does something called Herd the Turtles, which is like a dynamic hamstring where it looks, I can't even show you because this is a podcast, but it looks ridiculous, but you're kind of like scooping, stretching your hamstring.
Oh, that's what Thomas does,
right? He does that all the time. I'm always like, you look ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like kind of a combined like, maybe kind of a nerve glide with a hamstring.
I'm pretty sure
stretch.
Ben probably told him to do that.
Yeah, definitely. He probably did.
I was like, are you warming up for a ballet? Like, what is happening?
Well, you know, like as PTs, we see each other's notes. So like Ben and I treat a lot of the same patients. So you'll read what someone did. And I read like Herd the Turtles. And I was like, what are you doing? And so he had to demonstrate it for me. And I was like, oh yeah, I know what that is.
That's
Called
funny.
them scoops, but...
So that's just a term he made up.
I don't know if he made it up or what, but there's a lot of weird names for exercises that you can find.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But yeah, so that's something that's like high knees, butt kickers, knee to chest, anything like that is usually pretty helpful in priming that sagittal plane movement. But really anything that's kind of like a quick, fast movement is what's most productive prior to a run.
Cool.
And is warm up more important than the cool down?
As an uninjured runner, I would say yes.
Okay.
As an injured runner, I would say it depends on what injury you're dealing with. The other good thing you could do is like a yoga, kind of like a sun salutations. I'm not a big yogi, so I don't know the terminology, but doing something that's kind of like a flow of movement. So you kind of just work into different joints and kind of warm those up before you run. That's another good option. Gotcha. But yeah, I would say if you're uninjured, the pre-run is more important than the post-run.
Okay.
And then what about post-run? What's a best practice cool down?
Well, one is to really allow yourself to cool down. I think that's one thing that we don't do a lot of is like we go on a run and then we sit down and do work.
Yeah.
That's my favorite. That's one of my favorite things to do.
Pastimes. But that cool down to be able to like spend 10 minutes of your time actually doing longer duration stretching can be really helpful. And again, that's all just to reduce muscle tone. So you're not going to like make your muscles longer or anything like that. That was a big like controversy of how much you need to stretch to actually gain flexibility. Runners don't need to be that flexible in all honesty, but you do have to work on reducing muscle tone or you will end up with things like strains or in some senses, maybe a tendinopathy or something like that. Yeah. So having that cool down time to like do a longer stretch or really like kind of loosen up your body after, especially now that it's warm, can be really restorative.
Yeah.
I read this book and this guy said walking was like the number one thing we could do after a hard workout or run. Is that true?
Yeah. That's true. I think if I were to tell people like, this is what you should do, I would say finish your run, take your dog on a walk if you have one, or take like a 5-minute walk around the neighborhood and then spend like 10 minutes doing just like longer duration, at least 30-second holds of different
Okay, so the walk doesn't replace the stretching.
No. Okay. Sorry.
I've just been stopping because we have this giant hill right by our house and I hate running up it. So I just end my run at the bottom and I walk up it. And that feels like a proper cool down.
And it's not a bad idea because you do get a little bit of stretch when you walk up a hill. Okay. Like you're going through a greater range of motion or of movement. So, you could maybe like chalk that up as like a 2-for-1 special, but I would still say like maybe 5 minutes after that.
Okay.
Hill.
Now what do you think about like compression boots? What's the deal with those?
Oh man, I like hated on these so much. And then my husband got a pair.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't believe you spent this much of our hard worked money on these boots that fill with air. I love those things.
Really?
The biggest thing, I use them after a really hard workout or a soccer game particularly. I can't say that I've noticed like a huge, the idea is that it flushes out inflammatory processes that you get when you work your muscles really hard. Right. So it basically, your muscles work as pumps, and the compression helps continue that pumping effect and bring out any sort of inflammation that you may have gathered during a hard workout. So it should ideally make you less sore going into the next day, or into your next workout. I can't say I've personally noticed anything crazy about using compression, but I would say if you're someone who deals with kind of chronic muscle soreness, it would be worth investigating.
Okay. Interesting.
And this is like using them right after a workout, or is it like you're getting into bed at night and you can put them on?
Yeah.
All night. You're getting compressed all night.
10 hours.
Usually compression is the most, and the same thing when you see people run with like compression sleeves on their legs and things like that. Compression is most helpful during an exercise. And obviously you can't use compression boots while you're running. That would be insane. But
I'm shocked someone hasn't done it yet.
I know.
Mike Wardian, get on that. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, compression sleeves you can use. So it's most effective to use it while you're doing the activity or about like within the next 30 minutes after you're done with that activity. Okay. You might still get some benefits doing them late at night or before bed, but it won't nearly be the same.
Well, I feel a lot of people run a race, hang out for a few hours, get home.
Yeah.
When they're on the couch watching a movie or something, then they use them. Is that? I mean,
yeah,
I guess it's whatever.
You could still do that.
Okay. It's
just that those inflammatory processes have probably already started to kind of circle out of your system.
And then what are your thoughts? Because Thomas swears by these, and I was always skeptical, but I have to say, I feel like it helps me. But Epsom salt baths, is that real or junk science?
I don't know.
Okay.
I've never done one. I have a lot of patients who are like, oh yeah, I did an Epsom salt bath, and now I feel great.
I think like, Ben Adams doesn't, your cohort at your work. I don't think he, or counterpart, I don't think he is that into them or believes in them. But I will say, I ran a 50K yesterday, and then
congratulations.
You did an Epsom salt bath?
I did it felt bad like afterwards, and I was like, dude, like I took a shower and everything, and I was like, I'm just gonna take an Epsom salt bath too. And I have to say, I feel like pretty good today, way better than I thought I was gonna feel. And I felt like that, like I don't know. I felt like it made a difference to me.
Yeah. Was it hot?
Yeah.
I
Too
wonder
hot.
too.
Were you sweating?
I have a 3rd-degree burn. Yeah. I was, yeah. So I couldn't stay in for more than 20 minutes or so. But
that's all they tell you to do.
Oh, okay.
20 minutes. Yeah.
I didn't know if I should hang out there for 2 hours.
I feel like there's also the big debate of cold versus hot therapy.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So because we have a barrel that we were sent and we did it a couple times, and it's just, I hate being cold. So it's like, I just don't want to do it. But if you told me like this will make you way better for the next day, like I'd probably jump in.
Yeah. I also hate being cold. And I know like cold plunges are really popular right now.
Yeah.
And like doing the cold part of your shower at the end or something. I agree. Like my hot shower is the best part of my day.
Yeah.
And no one's going to take that away from me.
I'm the same way.
So
I'm like, I'm not giving it up.
yeah.
Try it from my cold dead hands.
From like a rehab standpoint, we typically say heat is really good pre-workout. So like to warm the body, to increase blood flow, to reduce muscle tension, heat is what you would use. If you're thinking about inflammation, a lot of times you're thinking cold. So if you have a fresh injury that's really new to you, using ice can be really helpful, but using ice 2 weeks down the line is probably not super helpful unless you're kind of like re-inflaming the tissue over and over again. So the idea behind cold in terms of musculoskeletal standpoint is that it's a really fast way to reduce the inflammatory process that comes along with.
But isn't that
activity.
part of the inflammatory process healing at the same time? So it's like you kind of don't want to stop it completely.
Yeah, in some sense, yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll get like a million opinions.
Yeah.
That seems to be one of those things where like almost like a diet, you can just, everyone has an opinion, has science to back it up, but
yeah, I think it depends on like how sore are you after your workouts. Like if you're someone who's like your next 3 days are ruined, then I would encourage you to try Epsom salt baths or a cold plunge or something to see like maybe the level of inflammation or the time at which it remains in your tissues is too much. And so you should try these other modalities to reduce that.
Yeah.
But if you're someone where your soreness lasts for 24 hours, then you're pretty much good to go.
Yeah, it's probably
I don't think
normal.
you have to sit in a cold bath.
Cool.
Okay, you studied psychology.
Yes,
How,
but like
how much of this is all in our head anyway? Are we like, dude, I use this and I feel better?
Yeah, true.
I learned in PT school, like the placebo effect is an effect. Like it is a powerful, the mind is such a powerful thing. And I would say that's why you have so many different opinions, is because people just see things differently. So I think a lot of it, there is physiological gains to heat, to ice, to salts, to things like that. The degree to which they really impact us is probably a large part psychological, I would say.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But that's a personal opinion.
Yeah. I remember there was this story, I think it was in Outside magazine a while back, and it was somebody who had short-term memory loss and could run like crazy distances because they forgot how far they ran all the time. Yeah. So it was,
the mind's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
and because they would just never feel like as bad as they normally would knowing they ran that far.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah.
I will tell you, I switched my watch to KMs instead of miles this morning.
Oh, really?
And I don't understand minutes or like per KMs. Like I have no idea what pace I'm running. I have no idea how far I'm running. And it was like very nice to come back and be like, oh, that's nice. That's how fast I was running. Like it felt comfortable. And I like ran way faster than I thought I was. And I'm like, it really is all in our heads.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in heads. Same with injuries. Like not that like one big thing you asked earlier, like big changes in physical therapy, a lot more like emphasis has been put onto like pain science and how the brain perceives pain, and especially chronic pain that like you're living with for a really long time. So that's one big development I think that's happened in medicine, and particularly in rehabilitation, of knowing like not the idea of like, well, the pain's just in your brain, you're making this all up, but knowing that like the way your brain perceives things can really, really change when it's been under like a constant stress. And the way, you know, if you think about running a marathon, like why is it that mile 22 always sucks for pretty much everyone, I would say. And I think there's like some sort of mental thought that like you're taught like mile 22 is going to suck.
Yeah.
It's the longest you may have ever run because maybe your training didn't get you there in the first place. So there's a long story short, there are tons of mental things that go into performance and pain. And a lot of it.
So I know you are a physical therapist, but are you also using like mental strategies to help people?
My biggest thing I try to encourage people is enjoy the race. Like, yeah, maybe you're trying to do something really big. Maybe you're trying to OTQ or you're trying to BQ or something like that. But like, it's going to hurt. Like, this is going to hurt. And it might not be a mechanical problem. So, like, don't be afraid of the pains that you feel. I usually try to give them advice as to, like, what types of pains are okay and what types of pains are not. Especially if they've been dealing with an injury, knowing, like, what's related to that injury and then what's also just not related to it. So I would say I kind of give them tips on that, but more so just to encourage them to kind of enjoy what they're doing and be mindful of what their body is trying to tell them, but also know that their body might trick them sometimes.
That was one of the questions we got, was how to know when to run through pain and when not to. And this is just in like a everyday training run. Like, are there things that we can check in on our bodies and be like, this is pain I shouldn't run through?
Yeah, absolutely. So I usually tell people pain, if it's something that as you continue running gets worse, is typically like a warning sign. So say it starts as nothing and then becomes kind of a dull nag, and then it just intensifies to a sharper quality or more pinpoint quality. That could be something that's more indicative of like a bone stress injury.
Okay.
A lot of injuries, they are not going to break you. With the exception of bone stress injuries, they can actually physically break your bone. And that's why you have to be really careful about them. But things like tendinopathy, tendinitis, the way those tissues work, you would need something that is a high velocity, high load. Like, you see people spontaneously rupture their Achilles playing basketball or doing parkour or playing racquetball. Those are like quick, fast, force-producing movements. Running, you don't really see someone on a distance run just rupture their Achilles altogether. Yeah. So I try to like acknowledge people, like, the pains that you have, if it's becoming more pinpointed and worse throughout your run, you probably shouldn't keep going. If it's getting better or staying the consistent kind of dull achiness, then you're probably okay to continue, but you might be developing something like a tendinopathy that might be harder to fully absolve yourself of later on down the line. Usually tendinopathy pains are actually worse when you're done running than they are. Like, running is like one of the things that makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And you can run through tendinopathies, but you do need to be doing other accessory things to actually get rid of it. You can't just keep running on it and like hope for the best. Usually,
that's what I did.
Yeah,
for 2 years,
like side-eyeing Robbe. Like, you can't just do that. There's usually other things that have to happen to make it go away.
You can't just put KT tape on. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
I tried every CBD cream on the market.
You did ask me about CBD cream. I remember that. I was like, Robbie, I don't know. Try it.
I will say the one, like the Floyds of Leadville, sometimes I'll use that. It's crazy high milligram. It's like 2,400 milligrams, pretty high up there. I feel like it does help a little bit sometimes if I just have a little bit of a kind of thing going on. Nothing severe, but I did want to say, because I think I brought this up on the one drop or something, where do you feel like as runners, you over time from running, I don't know, for years and years, that when you were a beginner runner, injuries felt like a bigger deal? And then I'm like, I can't tell if I'm just running through all my injuries that I would have, like, as a beginner runner, been like, oh, this is a big deal. Because I'm like, I think I just got used to some things.
Yeah, I think so.
Like in the same way that I used to hate like the cold and being out in the cold, and now I'm like, oh, it's 30 degrees, I can still wear shorts, which would be insane like 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think the body and the mind just become more resilient overall. Like, I'm going to use my husband as an example and hope he doesn't listen to this. He doesn't run very frequently, and I could tell you, like if we were going to run this afternoon, I could tell you what he's going to complain of. He's going to complain of his Achilles, and he's going to complain of like his chest feeling like a little tight, or like he wonders if he's got asthma or like something going on. And I have to remind him that, like, Brendan, we have done this run before, and you have gotten past it, and then you've lived on to see the next day and didn't mention it until we do a run like 6 months later that you've decided you want to do. And so I think like you start to kind of pick these things out, and you realize like, oh, that was like a temporary pain, and I'm okay. And then eventually you kind of like build the resiliency against even noticing those things anymore.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Running is uncomfortable. So when you're new to it, I think it's easy to be like, is this okay that this is uncomfortable, or do I need to stop? And I think when you become more comfortable being uncomfortable, you don't even notice the things that you did before.
That makes sense.
I think that's also why so many people like quit running early, because you have to get past the suck. Like it sucks. But then once you get past that, it's great.
Yeah. And so many people are like, oh, I'm just not a runner. It's just not for me. And that's fine. Like I no worries. I don't need everyone to be runners. But sometimes I'm wondering like, well, like you have a little grace with yourself. Like don't feel like you have to go fast or go far. Like just try to consistently do it. And I think you would see the benefits of it. My dad thinks that he just doesn't get endorphins. So he says the same thing. He's like, I tried it, but or I don't have like the brain chemicals that create endorphins. So I stopped. And I was like, okay, whatever you say.
That's the best.
Yeah.
I don't get the endorphins.
Yeah. He's like, my brain doesn't make them. I was like, well, we don't know that, but yeah, I do think that the more you do it consistently, the more you might kind of like it.
That's cool. Let's move on to maybe some injuries that some runners had some questions about. All right. I don't know which runner would ask this kind of question, but how do you keep from rolling your ankle?
Okay. So the thing about ankle sprains is that they perpetuate themselves. So when you sprain your ankle once, you are exponentially more likely for it to happen again. And then if you do it 2 times, the chance of a third goes up even higher. So,
what about 20 times?
Yeah, 20 times you're looking at a guaranteed ankle sprain in your future, probably. And the reason that is that most ankle sprains occur via inversion, meaning you roll over the outside of your ankle. And then you stretch those ligaments out. And when you stretch out a ligament, there's really nothing you can do to tauten the actual ligament itself again.
It's just like that forever?
Yeah, it's stretched out pretty much forever. You'll have ankle laxity.
Almost cool. Yeah.
Sorry, Robbie.
So there are other structures, though, in your ankle, particularly muscles. So what the tensile factor of the ligaments that you once have, you don't have anymore, but you can still strengthen the eversion muscles, which are, for people listening, if you Google like your fibularis muscle group or your peroneal muscle group, those are the things that evert your ankle, and they actually kind of counter the idea of an inversion ankle sprain. So things to do for ankle sprains to make you a little more resilient against having another one is usually you do need some form of external support. Typically tape is the best way to do that.
I did do that yesterday on for the trail run. And I feel like that helped a lot, which if I'm running trails now, I always tape them. So I do like KT tape first around it. So it's not so sticky, and then I do the medical tape.
Yeah, that's good.
Around that. And I feel like that has saved me.
That doesn't sweat off. Like mine just sweats right off if I try to tape anything.
Oh, I haven't had any issues with it, I guess, but maybe I haven't run like in the super hot.
What about like
sorry, that's a personal question.
I do shave my legs. Yeah.
So that can if you're shaved and well moisturized, the tape
that's
has a
probably
harder
the problem.
time. Yeah. Okay. So you should just stop doing that.
No more shaving. No more moisturizing. Got it. What about like a sleeve though?
Sleeves,
like a compression sleeve around the ankle.
Dude, I can't do them. All right. Anyways.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sleeves will, I think, give you the comfort of stability.
Yeah.
But if you were actually in a position of you're on a root or a rock and you go into that kind of dicey position, it won't actually help
do anything. Okay.
For me, the sleeves and the arch of my foot just bothered me so much. I feel like when I'm running, because you still have a sock on, and I don't know. I just hate the feel of it. Like I just can't run with it on. But the taping has seemed to help me for sure.
And you want like kinesio tape is okay, but kinesio tape is meant to stretch. So the fact that you're doing the medical tape over top is good.
Yeah, I think that's just to prevent it from sticking, like from hurting like hell when you pull it off, you know? So yeah, doing the medical tape around. Yeah, because the KT tape doesn't really provide structure.
No, not really. And then also I've worked with a lot of trail runners who are just prone to ankle sprains. And you can do exercises, I call them like train your sprain exercises, where you put yourself in this position. A lot of times it's on, do you guys know what a Bosu ball is?
I
It sounds
heard of
familiar.
that.
Yeah.
It's like one of those workout things where it's like a half ball, half
Yeah.
platform.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah,
you can
yeah.
work on it either
Yeah.
direction. So if you flip it over, you can actually work on like really promoting your own ankle's ability to stabilize itself and really like kind of extenuating circumstances. So you actually train your ankle in like an inverted position so
So you stand on the...
yeah.
You should just get one of those and work from your standing desk with that
Yeah.
all day.
Yeah, there you go.
Strengthen.
Does
ankles.
because I have that Mobo board at home,
yeah.
and I sometimes will like stand on that if I'm just doing stuff. Does that help that area, or is that more the hip? It seems to help more like the hip area.
It does engage the hip,
Yeah.
and it does a lot of foot intrinsic strength.
Yeah.
Intrinsic foot muscles mean that they live within your foot and they don't actually cross your ankle. So that's the only problem is like getting the actual everters involved
Yeah.
would be kind of hard if you're just using it in the traditional sense.
Right.
But you can actually take the fins of a Mobo board and put the board into an inverted position and then do things like single leg squats in that position or deadlifts or things like that.
Okay.
So you can actually kind of manipulate the board itself to put your foot in that kind
Okay.
of ankle sprain position.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, good to know. And do you think after spraining my ankle so many times that I honestly feel like at this point it's so stretched out that it almost like has come around full circle to where
Wow.
I recover faster? Is that real, or am I just used to getting sprained ankle?
Well, I worked with you. Are you okay if I talk about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Patient confidentiality
HIPAA.
absolved.
Yes,
Go
okay.
for it.
Consent given.
Can't wait to hear what her This is like the Seinfeld episode where Elaine wants to see the doctor's notes. Can't wait to see what it says.
You're I think at your baseline a more mobile person. So people tend to live in this kind of the scale of stiffness versus hypermobility. And you I think are on like the scale it's a little bit more mobile, like your ligaments themselves have a little bit more laxity. And I noticed that like with the way your hips move when you run.
Oh yeah.
And so for people like you, the stability component becomes even more important because you're just at your baseline more prone to things like sprains, even like tendinitis is, because the things that give your structures more of their stiffness, those things are just kind of looser. So you're more prone to overusing dense
Yeah.
connective tissues like tendons and rolling through motions because your ankle joint goes further than like mine does.
I mean, that made a lot of sense because when you measured that flexibility in my hips and you were like,
Yeah.
did you sit like a W when you
Yeah.
were a kid? And I was like, oh yeah, like
Yeah.
that's the only way I sat
Yeah.
like growing up.
That's so weird because in my mind, like being very flexible and mobile sounds like a good thing, but you're saying it's not.
Not really. Yeah, not really. When you think of running in particular, it actually can be like a pretty big barrier.
That's good because I think I'm very stiff. Like
Yeah.
my joints just don't move.
Yeah, I mean, even like especially even on trails and stuff, if I can feel like I know what you're saying because I can feel it. It's not like in line, like it's kind of like all over the place because it's. I just, especially if I don't do the band exercises, the side steps, I feel that's like super important. It keeps things like lined up more. But yeah, I definitely think that that plays a huge part in that.
Yeah, and the reason that is like the band exercises you always see people doing, like it strengthens your external rotators and in a sense your glutes, because that's what your glutes do. You have so much internal rotation at your hips. I remember that.
Yeah.
And that ability to go into internal rotation will then cause like a turning in of the knee and sometimes an overpronation of the foot. And a lot of
Is
times
that like landing on the outside kind or like
it's It's when all your weight is on one foot, it means your arch might actually kind of collapse a little bit more under you, which in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's just the degree to which someone has it can be a bad thing. And usually you kind of see this entire movement pattern of hip internal rotation, knee diving in, foot pronating, and it kind of causes what we call a medial collapse. And it's a big mechanical, I don't want to say flaw, but it's a mechanical thing we look for in the likelihood of someone developing an injury. And when someone is more mobile, they're much more likely to have that pattern than someone maybe like Megan and I, where like I have no hip internal rotation. Like I couldn't go there if I tried. Yeah. So I might run into my own issues, but they might be different.
Interesting. Cool. It's good to know. All right, let's get we can move on from sprained ankles. I think we've covered enough about that on this podcast. I think another big ones was shin splints. I think a lot of people deal with that, especially beginner runners. I feel even I've had that when I was beginning running. So what causes that, and what's something people can do for that?
Yeah, so shin splints can be kind of two different things. They can be their formal name is called medial tibial stress syndrome. And it's a fancy way of saying like something is stressing out the inside of your tibia. That could be the actual impact of the run itself on your tibial bone or your tibia, which is the bone. Or it can be more of like an apophysitis, meaning the muscles of your lower leg, your calves, your posterior tib, which is the muscle that controls your arch collapse. Those muscles are actually pulling at your tibia, and that actual connection between the tendon and the bone is what's getting inflamed. So it's very hard to differentiate it, and to be honest, you treat it very similar regardless. And it's really common in new runners because they're not used to like that impact of running. It's one of the main running related injuries that is pretty heavily tied to shoe wear. So if you're talking with someone who's really potentially in a really bad shoe for them, shin splints is usually what you'll run into first. But a lot of times it's your bone and the muscles getting used to the impact of running. So a lot of times you'll see people kind of get over it, honestly, in a sense, without doing much physical therapy. Like if you ask them, it's almost like something they forgot about, and they're like, oh yeah, I had shin splints, I forgot about that. Yeah. But some people it just perpetuates itself. And the main reasons I see people who have it perpetuated is, one, they don't have the ankle mobility like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, and they're not doing the right things to promote ankle mobility. So they're kind of like running into a hard block with every step that they take and every landing that they take. And that hard block becomes bone stress, or shock attenuation, I guess, in your tibia. The other thing is that it could also be a strength issue, that their calf muscles and their tibialis anterior, which is the muscle in the front of the leg, are just not strong enough to either control their landing or to propel themselves forward. And so they're running into shin pain because of that.
And can that become a serious thing, or is that just like something that is just can sometimes be always theirs?
So that's when you start to monitor the pain. So the shin is the most common bone stress injury site for runners, and oftentimes it will present just like a shin splint. That's not to say that shin splints always turn into bone stress injuries, because they don't.
Dude, I feel like 90% of people who have a shin splint think they have a bone stress injury.
They do. Most people do. Yeah. And for good reason, because they kind of present similarly, with the exception of there's like hallmark signs to a bone stress injury, particularly tibial ones. And one is pain that doesn't warm up. So the pain, like we talked about before, it gets worse with activity. And then also, like, it's more point tender. So shin splints tend to feel like kind of dispersed along your shin. And you oftentimes have them bilaterally or on both sides as you start running, whereas it's very rare to have a bilateral stress injury. And usually it's more pinpointed. I think it's the distance of, I think it's 1 inch that you want to be able to palpate. And if it's longer than that, then you can usually say it's more of a shin splint versus a stress fracture. But if it's something that like you cannot run through, that is the hallmark sign of like shin splints versus stress fracture.
Okay.
You brought up that those are related to shoes a lot of the time. Okay, so shoes have evolved quite a bit in 8 years. Now we have super shoes. Everyone's running in carbon plated shoes. Are you seeing injuries more prevalent now with the change of shoes or the same?
Well, typically when you think of shoes and their relationship to injury, I like to say most of the injuries you're going to see are going to be foot or shin. The closer you are to the ground, the more impact the shoe has on running form and on developing injury. So I always like to tell people, don't blame or praise the shoe that much, because the majority of times the shoe is not really the problem.
Yeah.
Or it's not really the solution either. But for some injuries, shin splints in particular, the shoe can be a problem. And I think a lot of times what I see is most people are not having the support that they need when they run. So I saw a lot more injuries when minimalist shoes were really popular. We saw a lot more metatarsal stress fractures. People were not prepping their body to transition to a minimal shoe. It's very possible to do that. And in the long-term scheme of things, I understand the theory behind minimalist shoes and how they can be effective, but people aren't willing to take the oftentimes 6 months it is required to really adapt to those type of shoes. I see much less injuries with the cushion shoes, like Hoka's. Everybody tends to kind of love those and assimilate to those pretty easily. Brooks Adrenaline, Brooks neutral shoes, typically people don't really have issues with. But the biggest thing that I see is people either try to do a zero drop shoe or a low drop shoe and they don't have the ankle mobility for it, or they don't have the plantar flexor calf strength to use the shoe effectively. I also see a lot of people I think I texted you about this, Robbe, actually, is how fast you need to be running to actually maximize the plate in a shoe. I see a lot of people running in these really nice, Nike Vaporflies or whatnot, but they're running a 9:30 pace, and then they're wondering why they're getting more knee pain, and it's you're kind of propelling yourself more up and back than you are actually forward, and it's kind of inhibiting your natural mechanics versus helping. So I think the biggest thing is I've seen people get into these plated shoes or these high stack shoes thinking it's a performance enhancer, but to be honest, they're not quite fast enough to use that capability of the shoe. And so that energy goes somewhere else and in a different direction.
I'd be interested because Solomon came out with a shoe. It's called the S-Lab Spectre. That's supposed to be for 3:30 runners and slower. They're and they have another one that's for fast runners. They're if you're a slower marathoner, don't use this. Don't use our, high or most, not most premium, but just this race shoe, which is for faster people. And then they said they've done a lot of research and studies saying the slower shoe is meant what you're saying. And I'm interested to see get your hands on that to see, or see someone who runs in it to see if that's actually is the case,
Yeah. Yeah. Cause you can see visually when someone, and I don't mean this disrespectfully for people who have different paces, but you have to be quite fast to get the capabilities of a super shoe. And I've seen people who...
it's designed for the elite. That's who they tested on, the elite athletes.
You're thinking of someone who lands very much underneath themselves, is typically probably more of a 4-foot striker, and they've got that beautiful ankle pathway behind them where their heel is basically touching their butt. And it's this beautiful cycle of gait. But you have to be quite fast to have that kind of cycle, because so much of that is momentum. And so when you don't have that speed to create that momentum, I've seen people literally, I watch them, I'm you are propelling yourself backwards almost at this point. Or you're almost stabbing the ground and then kind of retro pulsing backwards. So I not to say that they're not cool shoes. I don't know if I'm fast enough to be wearing a plated shoe, but I feel faster, so I still wear them.
Yeah.
And there's a placebo effect.
So
it comes together. That's funny. But you said that since the pandemic, you've seen an uptick in bone, stress fractures. Is that right?
Yeah, bone stress injuries.
And so, what do you think? Do you think that's because of super shoes? More people getting into running, taking a break from races? What do you think it is?
I think there's a lot of factors. I don't think it's because of super shoes.
Okay.
One, the patients that I'm seeing don't necessarily use them.
Okay.
And so I don't really think it's as much involved with shoe wear. I think the big issue is that bone health in and of itself is kind of built in your adolescence. So if you have, not even just in the last couple of years, but in the last maybe 20 years where like our youths are not as active as they used to be. Like I'm seeing a lot more bone stress injuries in younger people.
Wow.
Like my older patients, not so much. It's more my younger,
Yeah.
like collegiate level runners. And not to say that they were lazy kids or something like that,
No,
but bones really, they are meant to be loaded and loaded in very diverse ways. So putting your kids in soccer and basketball is like one of the best things you can do to promote bone health later on down the line. And I'm talking in your 60s, your risk of fracture is much lower if you played soccer when you were 14.
Wow.
Well, I mean, and does this also come down to the specialization of sports where, you know, when we were going, even in the 90s, I feel like 80s, 90s, and before that, you would play basketball in the winter, soccer in the spring, baseball summer, whatever, or, you know, and do something else in between. Whereas now you might play travel baseball all year round or AAU ball all year round. And so you're not getting those different types of sports. I think that's like a large theory why baseball pitchers blow out their arms like way more now, even though they threw way more innings before.
Right.
And do you think that's kind of maybe
I think that's
behind
part
that
of
as
it.
well?
I think it's like, if you just think of kids now, like you grew up skateboarding, right? You told me, I think. Like skateboarding is one of the best things you can do for bone health because the pull of your tendons when you jump on your bone basically makes them build in multiple directions or kind of react in multiple directions. Same reason why basketball is so helpful. Same reason why soccer is so helpful. It's that multi-directional movement. I think kids now aren't maybe as active as they once were because we have technologies advancing and things like that. I think in the COVID era, all those leagues were shut down, gyms were shut down. So things like weight training for a lot of people was put on hold. So things that just kind of diversely loaded your bones, you weren't doing anymore. And then you're also not getting a lot of sunlight if you're staying inside. And vitamin D is really predominantly absorbed through the sun. So you also have this almost vitamin deficiency with lack of activity. And then a lot of people did start running because it was literally one of the only things you could do for a while. And running is better than sitting for your bones, but your bones get really bored really fast. So after a few minutes of running, your bone will not continue to respond to the load of it. Yeah, it needs to be almost confused. Like it needs to be tricked into responding to something different, or else what was bone building can be actually what's called catabolic, meaning it breaks down bone cell growth versus builds it up.
Do you feel like, what about trail running, since that's more dynamic?
Trail running is a little more dynamic, so you get a little bit more, but overall the mechanics of trail running and road running in and of itself is still not diverse enough to build your bones that way.
Interesting.
So for COVID, that's what we saw is a lot of people were not doing bone building activities for whatever reason. And I think even before that, I think some of like our youth now are not actively engaged in bone building activities when it's the most important, which is usually between the ages of 9 to 14.
Man, I need to invest in like some osteoporosis companies or something like down the road.
That is never how I would like think of.
I don't know. I'm just like thinking ahead of what's this going to mean in 20 years. Like seriously.
Where to invest.
I mean, that is interesting though to think about that. If you're just seeing that in the running department, what does that mean in, you know, in 20 years from now or whatever, for when those same people are older in their 50s or 60s, you know?
Yeah. And I could like rant on this for forever, but when I see like kids who just don't do anything, they just like sit on their shows and their video games, like I could go on and on forever, but like you are losing like the most important era of their life cycle. And like, if they could just do sports like 2 days a week, like what that would do to help them even into their collegiate level. Yeah. You know, if they do become a distance runner, we're seeing distance runners who did sports growing up significantly reduce their risk. And we're seeing people who fall, they don't actually fracture their hips because they played sports at 14. That's just so crazy.
That is kind of wild. That's that impactful. Yeah. So if someone is starting running later in life or just as an adult and they didn't do sports growing up, like is there anything they can do?
Yeah, absolutely. So strength training is the biggest thing, and you want it to be heavy. Like a lot of people are afraid to lift heavy. You should probably learn how to lift first before you do that, whether that be work with a physical therapist or a personal trainer. But you don't actually have to do that much strength training to get the effects of it. A lot of times you can do like 4 sets of 8 reps twice a week.
And when you're talking strength training, what do you mean by that?
I'm talking like getting in a squat rack and putting a bar on your shoulders and doing 8 reps and the 9th rep being too heavy to perform.
Okay.
Or I'm talking about...
That sounds awful.
Yeah, it is, but it's only going to take
What's
you like
the next
15
recommendation?
What else you got?
So you want, if you think about it, like for bone stress or bone health, you want it to be like heavy axial loading. So things like squats and deadlifts are really helpful. And then also things like heavy calf raises are really helpful because of the tibia being the most affected bone site. And then so if you were to do anything, do 4x8, 4 sets of 8 reps of a heavy squat, a heavy deadlift, and heavy calf raises. And then follow it up by jumping off of a box and landing on your 2 feet. 3 times.
Still not.
This would take you like 25 minutes, twice a week, 50 minutes total.
Wasn't Thomas doing box jumps and then like destroyed?
Like broke his back.
He might have been doing it wrong. I don't know. We'll just say that. That's funny, but okay. Well, that's especially if you're starting out.
But there are also, I'm very passionate about strength training. I understand why people don't want to do it, but also the effects it has on your running economy is really pretty substantial too. Wow. So if you're trying to get faster and more efficient, strength training has that role too. And a lot of runners are afraid, like, I don't want to get bulky or I don't want to be.
Yeah, because that's a common thing.
And there's tons of ways you can implement strength training in a way that you gain really no change in mass, but you get all of the strength benefits of it.
I mean, I think a lot of runners think when they run, they're saying, oh, well, I'm getting this exercise, I'm strengthening my legs. But are you telling me that's not enough then?
I'm telling you it's not really strength.
Okay.
I'm telling you it's like endurance.
Yeah.
You might be stronger than the person sitting on the couch, but you're not actually doing something that promotes strength.
Yeah. Okay. Now, say someone maybe they don't have the time to go to the gym, or because a lot of parents or people, just like with responsibility, maybe have to drive far to work. They don't have time to do the running and go to the gym. What's a way you could do that maybe at home that would get at least some benefit? Maybe not the same as loading up a squat rack, but
I would say buy one heavy kettlebell. Okay. One that is hard to lift. Or buy 2 moderately heavy ones. And then you can pretty much do it all from your house.
Okay, so same kind of setup, just with kettlebells.
Because you can jump off like your step if you want to. Yeah. Or if you need plyo stuff, like you can figure out.
I mean, we have stoops here in Baltimore. Just freak out your neighbors. Yeah, just every day.
Casual.
Jump off your stoop. I'm sure I freaked out my neighbors more by doing other things than that. So, okay, cool. Let's see. So another question that was very common in our survey was like piriformis syndrome. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then also IT band syndrome. I think that's a big one. I always hear IT band syndrome, and I think a lot of people don't even know what it is.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's do that one first.
Okay, you can do that first. Okay.
So, because someone asked, A, fixing and curing IT band syndrome, and then B, is it possible to rehab IT band syndrome while still training for a half marathon and insert any race into that? So
IT band syndrome probably in and of itself gets overdiagnosed because there's certain things that are really easy to diagnose, like without actually performing a full assessment. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. So the things you'll hear is like, I went to the ortho and they said I have plantar fasciitis. And I was like, well, how did they come to that conclusion? Like, well, I pointed to where it hurt in my foot.
And then they spun a wheel and the arrow pointed to that.
or if they went, and there are plantar fasciitis is quite common. It could be that, but
Yeah.
like they didn't measure how much great toe motion you have. They didn't measure how much ankle mobility you have. They didn't see how good you are at performing a single leg heel raise. So they don't, those things might not have been actually assessed to break that down. IT band syndrome is another one of those common, like you have pain on the outside of your knee when you run, so it's IT band syndrome. But they don't look at how strong your hips are. They don't look at how well your kneecap moves, things like that. So there's a lot of like intricate things you have to investigate. But generally speaking, IT band syndrome is characterized by pain on the outside of your knee, and it happens really mostly just with running. And it's the friction of the end of the IT band rubbing against the outside of the knee and some of the bony prominences that exist there.
Where's the IT band at? Was that run along the side of your leg then?
So it connects, it's not a muscle. So a lot of people say like you can't
really?
stretch your IT band, and you can't because it's not a muscle. It's actually a really thick, almost like tendon type structure. So you can't really stretch it. You can stretch this muscle is called the tensor fascia lata. It is in your hip, and that's where it comes out of. So you can stretch that muscle. You can stretch your quads, and you can stretch your hamstrings, because all of those have insertions into the IT band itself.
Okay.
But you can't actually stretch the band. So a lot of people will spend their time.
So it's almost like a board than a band.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like if you think it's almost like a dog leash versus like a resistance band
Okay.
in terms of structure.
Interesting.
Typically what you need to do, and this is where the glutes do come into play, is strengthen your hip external rotators and those muscles that are like hip stabilizers, because IT band syndrome is typically related to pelvic drop, or typically related to what we talked about with you, how the hip kind of turns in too much when you run. It can also be related to too much pronation at the foot. So those are usually the biomechanical causes of IT band syndrome. The last one being also if your running form is more as someone who crosses over, like your leg actually crosses in front of your body versus in line with your hip joint. All of those things predispose you to load the outside of your knee more than your entire knee in and of itself.
Yeah.
And that's why you get that kind of point tenderness there.
I'm actually shocked I haven't had that before.
Don't even say it. Don't say it out loud.
And if you're weak, you tend to rely on passive structures because they can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, you rely on tendons, you rely on IT bands because your muscles aren't doing what they're supposed to. And your muscles basically kind of pass off the force to your tendons and to your more dense connective structures. And that's why you see so many tendinopathies and things like that in runners. It's really more of a strength issue of the glutes, particularly in this case, versus it's an actual IT band issue.
Okay.
But you can rehab it while you train.
Okay.
It depends kind of on how severe it is, but it's not something that is going to turn into a bone stress injury. Okay. It's not that type of injury. You usually just have to have like a good strengthening program, and you usually have to have a good tone reduction program. That's why dry needling is usually really helpful, particularly in the quads and the hamstrings for that.
Yeah. And then, so interestingly, when you talk about how they'll go to ortho and they'll just diagnose you with something, I feel like this is a problem a lot of people have, is that it's just kind of finding someone that actually knows what they're talking about. I mean, when I, had the high hamstring tendinopathy, I went to a place and I don't know, it just seemed like they just wanted to like look at you and then get you out the door kind of thing. Or the dude told me to go like recommended surgery right away.
Oh, wow.
Like they did an MRI. He was like, yeah, you have a small tear here. You should go to this orthopedic surgeon. And I was like, I'm going to maybe like check out another opinion, which thankfully I went to you. Because can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Like that would, like how if someone was just like, oh, well, he's a PT, he said to go to orthopedic surgeon, obviously they're going to tell you to get surgery, and that would have been such a huge ordeal.
Tough
for something that took
a
month of 6 weeks of PT for me to get rid of,
Yeah.
So what do you recommend to people to avoid a situation like that?
Well, one, you have to realize with every field there's good and bad. So I have orthos that I work with that have been excellent. I think physical therapists, a lot of people don't realize is like we do have a decent amount of education. Like 7 years is a lot of time to spend on the human body. And so we should theoretically kind of know what we're talking about. We also have much more time in most cases than orthos have with you. Typically an ortho appointment, if you ever see an orthopedics schedule, it's like 15-minute increments.
Yeah.
Whereas for a PT, ideally you'd have a full hour evaluation to where they can really look at some things. And so I think physical therapists have more knowledge than most people expect, and I think we have more time to actually dive into like what we're looking at. And now, because of direct access, which again is that ability to kind of go see a PT, you can go see one first before you ever consider surgery. And most PTs, at least the ones that I know, are really good at kind of mitigating, hey, this is something that might actually require surgery, and hey, this is something that it does not need that. Now, with PTs too, there's good and bad in everything. So you might go somewhere and have 4 patients an hour, and you're all doing hamstring stretches at the same time, and you're like, well, what is happening?
I mean, that's also the thing. I went to, I'm not going to say where it was, but because I think a lot of people still go there. But I think it was a newer PT maybe, and it's really seemed like she was just kind of throwing exercises at it to see what would stick. And I think a lot of them, when I came to you, were not ones I should have been doing, because maybe making it worse. And that, I feel like that's just like so frustrating, because you think that because they are a PT, even at work, even related to running, that they would know what they're doing. So it's like, how do you tell if like it's working or not? I guess that's the thing.
I think one is when you're actually in the PT process, like it's always good to ask your PT, like, why am I doing this exercise? It's not offensive. If your PT is offended by you asking why you're doing something, then you probably are in the wrong place. But like the PT should be able to explain to you like what the correlation is between what you're doing and how it's going to help you. So that's one thing to look out for. 2, if you're going for a running related injury and they never watch you run or never have you run in the clinic.
Oh yeah.
That's like a big problem.
Yeah.
Because then they are probably relying on like other information that is not at all related to your actual biomechanical running form. And so they might be making assumptions. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it really is like they know your hips are super weak and your main problem is that. But if there's some sort of intricate detail, like they won't find it through purely strength testing your hips. They need to actually be able to see like how you're running in and of itself.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. And
basically just go to Annie is the moral
Yeah.
story.
There's
I would say-
other good. Of course I think we're the best, but I think there's other good PTs too.
I think we're lucky too in that we are in Baltimore, which is, Hopkins, a lot of medical, I would say a lot of the medical community. It's a very strong medical community. Whereas if you're in, frickin' Omaha, Nebraska, nothing wrong against Omaha, but it might not be where generally, it might be harder to find someone who is in that kind of specialty. But yeah, I think too, like especially if they're a runner, I'm assuming that's probably a bonus if the PT actually runs.
Yeah.
I know.
Same with orthos. Like if you can find an ortho who's a runner, typically, I'm not going to say like your experience will be better, but I think there's a little bit more.
It's just there's just an understanding of like they know you're going to go out and run the next day, even if they tell you that you have a stress fracture. There's just like an understanding, and I feel like a comfort level that comes with having a runner that's also a doctor.
Yeah, I think so. I think you guys had a podiatrist on once who was a runner. I can't remember her name, but I felt like she was someone that I was like, yeah, that would be the type of.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people also kind of choose what they decide to hear from their healthcare provider. And when the healthcare provider is like, oh, well, maybe just stop running. Maybe they don't mean like indefinitely, or maybe they don't mean like terminally, you're never going to run again.
Yeah.
They might mean like, hey, can you take a couple weeks off? But again, the time is so limited and it's kind of lost in translation. But having someone who can be a little bit more of like, hey, well, what's your weekly mileage now?
Right.
What are you comfortable bringing it down to? How much time do you have to focus on this in addition to that? Like, can we shut you down for this amount of time? Like, what are your main goals? Like, do you have to do this race? And are you willing to be in a boot afterwards for 6 weeks to get it done? Like what?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I really value about where I work is we have so much time with people where I like the first 30 minutes of our assessment is like, what do you need to do? Like what is success to you? And that time is invaluable.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to like assessing running injuries.
Cool.
Okay, we have like 1,000 questions that we could ask you, so we're just gonna have to have you back because we're already past the hour mark
I'm
here.
down. I'm up for it.
Yeah, but this has been super.
Oh, we're at an hour 20.
Yeah.
Dang.
Oh, wow.
That
Yeah.
went fast.
Yeah.
I feel like I zoned out.
Are there any other ones that you feel like are super important right now?
No, I honestly think we just have to have you back because like
Okay.
there's a whole list.
Yeah.
Like we didn't even talk about Achilles stuff, which is my problem all
Oh,
the time.
shoot.
Didn't even get to your
What
knees.
the
We
heck?
talked the whole time about Robbie's knees.
Man.
I
Egg.
know. It's always got to be about Robbie. It's fine.
I didn't-
We're just gonna have Annie back. It's fine.
I forget that you ever have any problems. I just assume you're always just at peak
Yeah.
physical performance.
Peak
So,
fitness. Always.
Honestly, I feel bad about that. Do you want to ask it?
No. We're good.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess she'll still be here after the podcast.
That's true. You can ask me after we turn off.
She's
or
gonna
whatever.
turn on the payment clock at that point. Though.
I'll bill you afterwards.
Yeah.
We'll send it to this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, this has been super helpful and informative, and I think a lot of people will get a lot out of it. So thank you for
Yeah.
coming on.
No, thanks for having me on.
And if someone wanted, maybe they are in the Baltimore area and they wanted to come to the Sinai Running Rehabilitation Program, what's the best
Nailed
way
it.
God, yeah, you did. You
I
said that better than I've ever said it.
I read it straight off the screen. What's the best way to do that?
It's a great question because things are always changing.
You're like,
kind
we're
of.
overbooked. Don't come.
No, it's not
kidding.
that. It's like the best way is to probably reach out to me directly.
Okay.
People can find me on Instagram. My what's it called handle? My handle
Yep.
is pace_doctor.
We'll put that in the
Show notes,
description.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so messaging me directly is helpful, or you can call our clinic and just ask to speak with Annie. And that number is 410-601-4353. And they'll either get me or they'll take a message and I'll call back, or one of our other.
Yeah,
running
one of your
specialists will.
other PTs, you'll be doing herding turtles.
Herding turtles. We'll be in the
Yeah.
busy process of herding turtles, so we'll call you after that.
Yeah, the places
We know that's where Ben's going to be.
they have a turtle infestation at the rehabilitation program that they're trying to get hold of. All right, cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me.
All right.
Appreciate it.
We'll have you back soon.
Yeah.
Cool.